This is Rabbi Sachs. Welcome to the Chai Academy and welcome to the Chai Center. We come to you as often as we can to discuss various topics of Jewish interest and based on various sources, by the way. So there is there's the literal source, and then there's the allegory, the hidden messages. There is numerical, gematria, and Hasidus or Kabbalah, so which is more esoteric and ethereal. So we try and offer a from a gamut. We don't just take from one source. And what we've been discussing, hello Eileen, what we've been discussing is Genesis chapter 2. We did chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2. Yesterday we posed a question, and the question was, God told Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge, because if you eat from the tree of knowledge, know that you will die. So the question we posed yesterday is, what's so bad about knowledge? What's so bad about, internalizing knowledge, right? Isn't that what life is all about? To have knowledge and to pursue knowledge, right? What do they say? History repeats itself. If we don't learn from history, so you got to learn. That's the idea. You got to learn. And in a nutshell, we gave a few responses, but the basic idea, and this is why it was a sin, is because up until then, it was what God determined between what was good and what was evil. But once they internalize from the tree of knowledge, then they became the arbiter. They became the ones deciding. And they decide what's right and what's wrong. And as we discussed, that our decisions of what's right and what's wrong can be biased, can be subjective, and often are. Right? I'll give you an example. I'll tell you a law in Judaism that says this point. Right? It says if a person walking in the street sees one person accost another, so that person can be a witness to say what he saw, but he can never be a judge. He can't adjudicate that case. Why? Because he knows I can never be biased. Don't tell me what I saw. I can never be biased. So that person is, and even by the way, even if it's self-defense, and the person could argue, no, but he hit me first, the judge could only say, no, this is what I witnessed, this is what I saw, and therefore I'm biased. Now, God sees the whole picture. We don't. So therefore, when a person is determines what's right and what's wrong, and doesn't let our Creator do that, if you're in tandem with the Creator, hi Susan. If you're in tandem with the Creator, that's great. But if you're not in tandem with the Creator, it's flawed thinking. It's flawed thinking, because God really knows what's best. And God said, don't eat from it. I'm telling you, I know clearly the demarcation between good and evil. You're not. You're going to be swayed. You're going to be bribed. You're going to think differently, not godly perhaps. So that's one part, just fleshing out the answer from yesterday. And secondly, and we didn't really discuss this yesterday, but we are created to be mind over emotions. Right? That's how Adam and Eve were created, and that's the ideal. That we don't let our emotions dictate, we let our mind dictate. Right? Our thoughts should lead to an emotion. It shouldn't be an emotion leading to our thoughts. And this is the reason, by the way, that a person who's sitting Shiva, right, is secluded into a house, doesn't make business decisions, don't make huge decisions in life, etc., but rather they're just somewhat isolated, because you'll be thinking with your emotion and not thinking with your mind, your brain, your intellect. So Adam and Eve were very, very much in control. Very much in control. Until they ate from the forbidden fruit. Once they ate from the forbidden fruit, their emotions were uplifted to the level of mind. And that, my friends, is what we spend all our lives on. Trying to assure that decision making should not be emotions, and to sift, to separate, segregate the emotions from the brain. It was separate. Adam and Eve pretty much made a kugel. You know how kugel is? You take this and you take potatoes and onions, and some people put carrots and and oil and eggs, and then you make this dish, this hapless sodium dish, and that's what they did. By eating it, is they integrated their emotions with their intellect, and that was wrong, and that's why it was a sin. It's interesting, Nachmanides, by the way, calls it the tree of desire. Doesn't call it the tree of knowledge. He refers to it as the tree of desire. That you eat from this tree, you're going to have desires. Right? You're going to have cravings, you're going to have lusts, you're going to have wants. All emotional. It's all emotional. That's what it is. From beginning to end, emotion. What is a lust? Lust is an emotion. If you thought about it, you wouldn't be lustful. A craving. Right? Right? You know, you want this bad. It's not necessarily the intellect. Most likely not the intellect. So now, moving on. So, what was the tree of knowledge? What was it? What type of tree? The most common answer is that the tree of knowledge was an apple tree. And that's why we refer to the Adam's apple, and you see in Michelangelo, you have the apple, etc. And that's the most common answer. And probably because in Latin, the word for evil, right? I'm dying for a bagel with cream cheese and tomato. You know what? It's I have a craving for that as well. But that's easeful. So an apple in Latin is malum. Malum, M-A-L-U-M. Evil in Latin is also malum. So perhaps that's why they came up with this thing called the apple, the poor apple. Now, I'll tell you a few commentaries. It's actually a fascinating topic. So one commentary says there's a reason why it doesn't tell us what type of tree it is, because it wasn't the tree's fault. And you say, oh, that's the that's it. It was this, it was that, it was this fruit, that fruit. Hello, Lisa. So if God would have told us what type of tree it was and what type of fruit it was, it would have maligned the tree and maligned the fruit. And people will say, cursed be this tree or that tree, because it was Adam and Eve ate from it. So therefore, the commentators, for the most part, they say that there's a reason. We don't know what it is. However, in the Talmud, it does talk about what they hypothesize, what type of fruit it was. So it's very interesting. Rabbi Meir, famous rabbi, quoted probably one of the most. He says it was a grapevine. And he says that the reason why it's a grapevine is because, grapes have been known to hurt man. Grapes are miserable. Just think of the alcoholics out there. Just think of the what AA is in every corner of the world, because of the grapevine, because of the original alcohol. So he says, generally grapes, even though it's a blessed fruit for sure, but because it brings misery to mankind, it makes sense that this was the original misery. And it was the grapes. And he says, and this, to prove it, that when Noah, after the flood, and Noah, the ark was on dry land somewhere in Turkey, What was the first thing Noah did? Right? He got drunk. He got drunk. So the first fruit they ate was also was the grape. He says that always seems to come up first. And in fact, according to Reb Meir, is that when we make Kiddush on Friday night, we make Kiddush over a cup of wine, Shabbat day, make Havdalah on a cup of wine, right? So there's 3 times we actually bless, right? It's with wine. And we sanctify. When did they eat the fruit? When did they eat the fruit? They ate the fruit Friday afternoon, right as Shabbat was coming in. Right as Shabbat was coming in, they ate the fruit. So according to Remeir, he says that's why we make Kiddush on wine, to commemorate that they did something negative, and we, in order to correct that, rectify that, we now will make Kiddush on wine. Right? By the grape juice also comes from grapes. So it's interesting, on Friday night, it has to be wine or grape juice. Right? Shabbat day, they're a little bit more lenient. It can be on any alcoholic beverage. Doesn't have to be wine or grape juice. Saturday night can be a wine and grape juice, and it could be also on the drink of the city. So in England, it's very easy. You can make it on tea. In the United States, probably coffee. So anyway, so that's what Reb Meir says. And we make Kiddush. When we make Kiddush, we think about the grapevine, and we think about what happened, right? What happened for what happened with the original fruit. That's according to Reb Meir. So Rebbe Nechemia, he says, no, I actually hypothesize different. I believe it was a fig. He says, why? Because after they realized they were naked, as we'll learn, because in chapter 2 it clearly says they were naked, and v'lo yispashashu, they had no shame. Anatomy, genitalia was just like a hand. It was the same thing. It wasn't. There was nothing to be ashamed about. Remember, they hadn't internalized knowledge. They hadn't internalized anything evil. They hadn't internalized, what. The only thing they knew was sex was holy. They didn't know that it could possibly, the holiest thing in the world could become the most debased and degraded thing there is. They didn't know that. It's only after they ate the fruit did they say, holy smokes, wow. So he says, so what happened? They ate from the fig. They realized they were naked. What did they cover themselves with? They covered themselves with fig leaves. Fig leaves are pretty big. And they cover themselves with fig leaves. And I think many of the pictures, you see that they actually have fig leaves. It wasn't apple leaves. It wasn't, apple tree leaves. It was fig leaves. So the very thing that they did, the very fruit they ate was part of that same tree, right? Covered their nakedness. There's an obscure commentary that says that it wasn't even. It was more like something like a grain. It wasn't a proper tree. It was more like. It was a substance. It was like wheat or something like that. Others say it was nuts. It wasn't an apple. It wasn't a fig, but it was a nut. Right? Me personally, by the way, if I was to be tempted with anything, if you think about it, how sweet and juicy and unbelievable this fruit is, for me, it would be a fig. There's nothing better than a fresh fig. Right? An apple is good, but apple leaves are much smaller than fig leaves, right? So fig leaves, wheat, nut. Once again, the Torah doesn't say what it is, because didn't want to malign, and we learn an incredible lesson from that, right? According to that commentary, I mean, think about it. The commentary says, how pure. Commentary says, God didn't want to malign the tree and the fruit, so therefore he left it out. My goodness. how much more so should we be careful? If that's true of a tree and a fruit, right? How much more so should it be about maligning a person, right? Causing harm, right? Gossiping, maligning, right? A person. God didn't want to talk about the fruit. So to me, that's just a pure lesson in itself. So continuing in chapter 2, God said, don't eat from this fruit, right? Don't eat from this tree. So don't eat from this tree, right? Don't eat, because the day you eat it, Ma'is Tamas, you shall surely die. But we found that when they did eat it, they didn't die, as we'll learn when we do chapter 3. So they didn't die. They didn't die. So the Torah tells us Ma'is Tamas surely died, but they didn't. So the obvious answer is that up until then, they were immortal. Once they internalized the fruit, they introduced the mortality. And God told them, that's the warning. That's the warning. If you remain wholly spiritual, then you could live forever. But if not, it's like toxicity, and you will not live forever. They lived for a darn long time, but they did not live forever. Right? And essentially, there's a piece of Talmud. There's a piece of Talmud which says that everybody dies in this world. Everybody, right? Nobody gets out of this world by being alive, right? So the Talmud says that because of the story of Adam and Eve and mortality being introduced, we should know that ultimately, when we die, it's because we are less than perfect. Ourselves, our own lives, not hinging it on Adam and Eve. He says, and the Talmud continues, and if you do find a person that is a complete tzaddik, completely righteous, right? And so you don't have anything to hang death on them. So the Talmud says, realize that it's because of Adam and Eve. So a person, when someone passes away, a person should never say, oh, that's because they're sinners, but rather, oh, that's because of what Adam and Eve did. Right? So technically, when we sin, we pass, we introduce mortality in our own lives. And if we never sin, we're going to pass anyway, because Adam and Eve introduced mortality. Right? And once again, mortality is only the body. Mortality is not the soul. So, so yes, the body dies, and the heart stops beating, and respiration ends, etc., and the whole process occurs, and we bury. But it's only the body, but it's not the soul. The soul is not subject to mortality. Soul is beyond mortal. So it's the concept of mortality was introduced. But here's an interesting point that we should discuss. After they ate from the fruit, God said, we got to make sure that they don't eat from the tree of life. Right? We got to make sure they don't eat from the tree of life. Now, it was only after they ate from the tree of knowledge. So it could be that this tree of life, if they ate from it, it makes sense to say this. If they ate from this tree of life before they ate from the tree of knowledge, it has no effect whatsoever. None. Because they were immortal anyway. It's almost like taking Tylenol for your headache, but you don't have a headache. You just don't have it. Right? Or if a person takes medication for depression, but they don't have depression. They took their spouse's medication. So you take that I don't know, Ativan or whatever it may be, that probably puts you to sleep. But you take something that you don't need, a cough medication without codeine. A cough medication will not stop your cough if you don't have a cough. So it could be they could eat from that tree of life. They could just eat from it because it meant nothing. They hadn't yet eaten from the tree of knowledge. Once they ate from the tree of knowledge, and once mortality was introduced, then that's when the tree of life comes into play. Oh, now you're mortal, and you want to come to the fountain of youth or the fountain of life? I gotta kick you out of Eden. I can't let you do that because you decided that you're going to be mortal. I warned you. So now I got to be careful that you don't eat from the tree of life. Now, others, forget others. Let's backtrack. So we know when you go to synagogue, right, and they sing when the Torah is being put away. They sing something called Eitz Chaim Hi. It's a tree of life for those who hold on to it. So that refers to the Torah, right? You know, the two staves when you pick up the Torah, that they're called the tree of life. Oh, my Eitz Chaim is cracked. My tree of life is cracked. I got to replace those staves. We sing Eitz Chaim, tree of life. So tree of life is Torah, is the manual for living, right? And Kabbalistically, they teach that if a person wants to assure that they have life after life, in other words, live on, that's the Torah. That is the tree of life. So in the time of Adam and Eve, there was a physical tree of life. It was this elixir, whatever it was. But once we were kicked out of Garden of Eden, we still had an opportunity to live and live again by respecting and studying and tapping into the Torah. And that's why it's called the tree of life. Because the soul, God decides where the soul goes after life, right? God decides. So with the Torah, we can steer that direction, that we go into heaven and we continue living, truly living, by the way. Good question. Did they have kids? Yes, of course they had kids. We know about, when we get to it, we know about Abel and Cain. We know about that they also had Abel and Cain were both born with twins. Cain was born first, Abel was born second, but it was a multiple birth for both of them. And so there was a few kids running around. They had other kids. A little later on, they took a break. Then they had what's his name? Seth, Shase. So that's the idea of the tree of life. Now, there is a commentary that says that the tree of knowledge is also Torah, right? That it's one and the same. If a person studies Torah in the same garden, the Torah tells us in the same garden, right there. I mean, we don't know if it was near each other, not near each other. It doesn't stipulate. The same garden, there was the tree of life, tree of knowledge. So according to one commentary, they were one and the same. They were exactly the same. And therefore, you eat the tree, you eat the fruit. Introduce mortality, don't eat another piece, because then you'll have immortality will be reintroduced. Taking that just to a practical lesson is that when we study Torah and we know the difference between good and bad, God's difference, right? When we study Torah, that we are also tapping into the tree of life. It was one and the same. It was one tree. It was one tree. So they're both the same tree is both things. When we study Torah, we accomplish both things. In the Kabbalistic lingo, the tree of life, what they call the tree of life, is actually the building blocks of creation. Right? So we know the world, and in the macro, the human being in the micro, was created with 10 building blocks, right? Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, kindness, severity, compassion, victory, splendor, bonding, and regality, regal. So those are the 10 building blocks of creation. In the Kabbalah, they call that the tree of life. That this is how the world exists. This is how the human exists. We all have these 10 attributes, and with these 10 attributes, we live, and we manipulate them for good. Thank you, Susan. That's so nice. So we're pretty much done. I mean, we're never done, but I think tomorrow we're going to start forging into the actual sin. We're going to, of course, ask the question, the real question, once again, the elephant in the room: why would they do this? Why would they do this? Right? It just does not make sense. Does not make sense. Why you were given the commandment not to do it from God, right? It wasn't Joe Biden telling you to wear a mask. It was God, right? And we'll add more details. Why? Why would they do it? What's wrong with them? And we'll discuss that, and you'll be surprised at the answer. And we'll discuss the snake. Who on earth is the snake? What is the snake? So all these things we have to discuss, and we'll get through what the Christians call the original sin, and we'll get through it. God bless. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask here. You can also email me, rabbi@thechaicenter.com, and please, if you are up to it, you can please share, so others can learn a little Torah as well. That's our job, right? We're all teachers. We're the Jewish people, and our job is to teach. We're human beings. We have to teach, even not Jews, right? We have to teach one after the other. Be well. God bless. Sei gesund.